Last week, the Republican-led Wisconsin legislature, backed by conservative majority courts, forced the state to hold an election in the middle of a national health emergency, a pandemic. Joe Biden ended up winning the state over Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary, but it's the result of another race that is most notable. Liberal challenger Jill Karofsky defeated Republican incumbent Daniel Kelly for a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Despite President Trump's endorsement of Kelly with 90% of the returns counted, Karofsky led Kelly by more than 100,000 votes and about 7 percentage points. The result narrows to a 4-3, the conservative majority on the nonpartisan Wisconsin Supreme Court, with the next seat up for election in 2023. The court is expected soon to decide a case that seeks to purge more than 200,000 people from Wisconsin's voter rolls. The Republican Party of Wisconsin issued a statement yesterday saying they are disappointed in Kelly's loss and accused Democrats of attempting to rig the election in their favor.
I'm sorry. John Heilman.
Are you serious?
John, I mean, you know, in the immortal words of Forrest Gump, stupid is as stupid does. And in this case, stupid, that would be the Wisconsin Republican Party, forced people to go out and vote in the middle of a pandemic, believing that it would lower turnout and would elect a Republican so they could purge voter rolls. Now, with one conservative voting with the two liberals in that 3-3 deadlock case, now we have that ramification that voting rights case actually may favor the voters, and maybe there won't be that massive voter purge that Republicans in Wisconsin wanted to do. But also, man, you look at Kenosha. If Tim Russert were alive, he'd say 2020 is about Wisconsin, more specifically Kenosha. And Kenosha went big for the Democrats' candidate.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, I'd say, you know, not just stupid is as stupid does, but stupider is as stupider does. And in this case, stupider was Donald Trump. I think, you know, you may remember on the Friday before the scheduled Wisconsin election, Donald Trump at the daily White House briefing, the show that we look at every day, he got up and said that the reason that the governor wanted to cancel or postpone the election was because he, Donald Trump, had that day endorsed in a very strong way Daniel Kelly, the Republican who was in that Supreme Court election for the Chief Justice. And Trump, of course, made the totally implausible claim that day that he had endorsed him that morning and that his poll numbers had already shot through the roof over the course of the subsequent 3 or 4 hours since he issued the endorsement. Another total inanity from Donald Trump. But that was his position. I endorsed this guy today. His poll numbers shot through the roof. And now the governor wants to shut down this election. Well, it turns out that the governor did, in fact, try to postpone the election on grounds of public health. The Wisconsin Republicans in the state legislature and in the Supreme Court roll over that order from Governor Evers. They held the election, and lo and behold, look what happened. Donald Trump's endorsement didn't turn out to keep that Supreme Court seat in Republican hands. In fact, the opposite thing has happened. And as you just pointed out, with this new Democrat, Jill Karofsky, on the court, and the one conservative justice siding with liberals on this voter purge question, you now have a functional 4-3 majority to not do the purge. And that purge, 200,000 names on the voter rolls that are at stake in that purge, that could be the difference between Republicans and Donald Trump. Let's be specific. That could be the difference between Donald Trump winning in Wisconsin this November and losing in Wisconsin this November, probably the most important state in the election this November. This could turn out to be the decisive thing that keeps Republicans from being able to steal this election in Wisconsin. We now have a chance to not have that voter purge take place and to have something that approximates a fair election in Wisconsin. It's a huge moment right now. This thing backfired in the most dramatic way possible, not just on Republicans, but on Donald Trump himself.
So, John, let's talk about November. We know in 2016 the spread was less than 23,000 votes that gave that state to Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. If you look at turnout, last week, and we got the results in last night that we saw the new justice headed for a 10-year term to the Supreme Court, the progressive justice, unseating a Scott Walker-appointed President Trump-backed conservative justice there. But what about turnout there? In Milwaukee, for example, 180 polling places were taken down to 5 polling places. People lined up for hours in the rain, in the cold, during a pandemic to vote. What does the turnout in that primary tell you about what we may see in that critical state in November?
Well, I mean, look, it's going to be impossible, Willie, to judge anything on the basis of that primary, given the unusual circumstances, so many voters who decided to stay away from the polls for reasons of their health. But even in that environment, you saw this overwhelming Democratic turnout in the state of Wisconsin. Relatively speaking, the turnout was not as high as it would have been if it wasn't for the fact that it was taking place in a pandemic. But the fact that Democrats were able to, the Democrats haven't won a judicial election to that Supreme Court in a long time, and it's the case that if you can't help but look at the fact that so many Democrats were given this unpalatable choice between protecting their personal safety and their public health and exercising their right to vote, and they decided to go out and do it anyway. And you saw a lopsided victory in that race, which was so important, and you saw it across the state. So, I think that if you're Republicans looking at the state of affairs coming out of this truncated Democratic primary season, what we've seen in January, February, March, and now into April, as most of these primary elections and elections have now been postponed in other states, there's nothing since March, since February into March and now April, there's nothing you can look at if you're a Republican in the way the Democratic primaries have played out and not be nervous about the fact that Democrats are incredibly energized, incredibly fired up, and you can't help but think that President Trump's performance in this pandemic is only going to raise the stakes on this election and drive Democratic engagement even higher.
We've been saying it for some time now. Those presidential briefings every day actually damage Donald Trump's brand, damages his poll numbers.
Totally.
And if you're in Pittsburgh, if you're in the suburbs of Philly, and you're worried about your parents or grandparents getting this, if you're in Florida, in Central Florida, where there's so many senior citizens, and you're worried about your mom or dad getting this, or your grandparents getting this, and you see that farce going on in the White House yesterday for over 2 hours, a president who doesn't once talk about his concern for the sick, his concern for the dying, but instead just, of course, talks about himself. It's going to be devastating for poll numbers. And Mika, you could look at what happened in Wisconsin, and who knows what's going to happen in the fall. But look at what happened in Wisconsin. Look what happened in 2019 special elections. Look at the historic landslide in the House in 2018. Look at what happened in 2017. Donald Trump has lost just about every critical race that he could lose. And even when Republicans win, they seem to be underperforming in dramatic, sometimes historic fashion. That happened again yesterday, as we've been saying for a very long time. Donald Trump is toxic to the Republican brand. You look at, I know we have to go, but I'm sorry, John Heilemann, Alex is going to yell at me, but I have to bring this up. I was reading the Banger newspaper yesterday and saw that Susan Collins is sitting with a 37% approval rating in Maine, a 54% disapproval in Maine. This is Trump is just absolutely destroying her chances. Whether you look at from Maine to Arizona, this guy is toxic.
Yes. I mean, look, Joe, you just made the point. The reality is that whatever you think of the strength of Donald Trump's base and everything that we talk about in terms of how he's been able to maintain the loyalty of the core group that support him, the reality is that in 2017, 2018, 2019, and now into 2020, every time voters have had a chance to try to send to vote in a proxy contest, which is what all of these are now. Every election is about Donald Trump. And in every instance, the electorate is basically saying, we want to cast our vote against Donald Trump, and measured in every possible way empirically. You've seen it now for 3.5 years. And you often say on the show that people say, well, Trump doesn't pay a price for all of his lies and all of his misgovernment and all of the things that we say that he does wrong. But he has paid a price, and the Republican Party has paid a price consistently now for 3.5 years. And I think it's just, if I'm a Republican right now, I'm looking at this Faustian bargain I made with Trump, and I'm thinking to myself, like Susan Collins must be, oh my God, the piper is about to come to get paid here in November, and it potentially could be very, very ugly.
Again, in the previous Trump scandals, John Hellman, the proof was redacted, rebranded, didn't really touch the American people or his people. But now the proof is in the suffering that people are feeling today. The proof is in the death toll, and you can't hide that. John Hellman, thank you very much.
And by the way, Mika, the proof every day is in the testing that millions and millions of Americans cannot get, and yet they see the President of the United States lying every day, saying, remember March 6th, the President said, if you want a test, you can get a test. That's the same day, by the way, Kellyanne Conway said this was contained. March 6th, also the same day that Larry Kudlow said this was contained. But that's when the President had his campaign hat on, and he said, if you want a test, you can get a test. Here we are in the middle of April. Millions and millions of Americans still cannot get a test.
And they can see it for themselves. So,
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.